She resisted inspection, her fault!
You fractured more than her wrist.
The sound of bone hitting tile isn't something you ever forget. 1 second, Sarah was standing there, calm, composed, holding our welcome mat in both hands. And the next, it was on the ground beside her, twisted under her wrist at an angle no human joint should bend. Cynthia Hale stood over her like a warden, guarding the gate to hell, red blazer crisp against the pale morning light. "Community standards apply to everyone," she said, voice steady as if she hadn't just hurt someone. I dropped the coffee mug still in my hand. It shattered across the porch, splattering dark streaks across her polished heels. "You touched her," I said, stepping forward. She didn't flinch. "I enforced a policy." That's what she called it, enforcement. Not assault, not cruelty, enforcement. Sarah was gasping, clutching her wrist, tears mixing with disbelief. My instinct was to help her, but my eyes locked on the board chair, the arrogance in her stance, the calm superiority that came only from someone who'd never been challenged. "If you've ever seen someone in power mistake fear for authority," I said quietly, "keep watching, because this is what happens when they pick the wrong doorstep." The ambulance arrived minutes later. The paramedics asked what happened. Cynthia smiled, stepping aside like she was the victim. "Accidental fall," she said. "The mat slipped." Her voice was steady, professional. She'd done this before. My wife whimpered as they lifted her onto the stretcher. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe right now. I looked at Cynthia. "You're not walking away from this." "The rules protect me," she replied. That's when I realized she believed it. She wasn't afraid because she was the rules, or so she thought. Inside the ER, Sarah's wrist was fractured clean through. She cried quietly while the doctor fitted a cast. I sat beside her, holding her good hand. "You don't have to go back there," she whispered. "She'll make it worse." "She already did," I said. "Now it's my turn." When I walked back to our house, the enforcer in crimson was there again, clipboard in hand, pen ready. A violation notice fluttered against my door. Improper display of personal messaging. Welcome mats prohibited under Section 8B. She looked at me as I tore it down. "Defacing a notice is another violation," she said. "I'm sure it is," I replied. "So is assault." The clipboard queen smirked. "You can file a complaint. I'll make sure it's processed." Her tone was rehearsed, her calm unnatural. But under that surface, I saw something else, certainty. She thought she'd already won. I said nothing, only smiled back. She didn't know who she was talking to. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, I sat at my desk, surrounded by legal briefs and federal case files. Years of prosecuting fraud had given me a nose for corruption, and Cynthia Hale reeked of it. I looked at the HOA charter she loved to quote so much. Every line was crafted to sound airtight, but the more I read, the more inconsistencies I found. Dates that didn't match, signatures from people who'd moved out years ago. The tyrant in heels had built her power on fear, but fear only works when people don't read the fine print. I flipped through state housing laws, checking incorporation filings. Something was off. Crestwood Meadows HOA's renewal date was missing from the state registry. The last approved filing was 6 years old. That meant every citation, every fine, every so-called rule she'd enforced since then wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. The officer of rules didn't have rules at all. I looked toward the dark street outside. Cynthia's house was visible through the blinds, a faint light glowing in her office. She was probably writing another violation notice, probably thinking about how to bury this one. But for the first time, she was dealing with someone who didn't fear paperwork, someone who wrote the kind that could end her career. The match she called a violation had just become Exhibit A. By morning, the violation spread through the neighborhood like gossip on fire. Every porch camera, every neighbor's doorbell feed caught pieces of it. Cynthia Hale's hand shoving my wife, the sickening sound of her wrist cracking against tile. And yet, by sunrise, the board chair had already sent out an email titled, "Clarification on Recent Safety Incident." Her version painted Sarah as non-compliant, agitated, and threatening HOA property. I read it twice just to absorb the arrogance. Threatening HOA property? She was talking about a doormat. The enforcer in crimson knew how to weaponize words. Every sentence she wrote was coded in civility, but built for war. I'd spent a decade reading statements like these in federal cases, half-truths wrapped in professionalism, designed to protect the guilty. When I stepped outside, she was already there, standing beside two security contractors, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on. She looked like she'd been waiting for me. "Mr. Reeves," she said, voice clipped, "we'll be issuing an emergency review of your property for compliance." "You're not authorized to enter my home," I said. The clipboard queen smiled faintly. "I'm authorized to protect community standards. Surely as a prosecutor, you understand the importance of law." I took one step closer. "I understand the importance of lawful authority, and yours expired 6 years ago." Her jaw didn't move, but her eyes flickered. Just a heartbeat of uncertainty. Then she recovered. "Misinformation spreads easily," she said. "Perhaps you've been reading outdated records." She didn't know I'd already verified it with the county clerk at 2 a.m. The HOA's corporate status had quietly lapsed. No annual renewals, no board. Filings, no lawful standing. What she'd been running wasn't a homeowners association. It was an elaborate illusion of one. "You really want to keep this up?" I asked. "Because when I file the motion, it's not going to be a complaint. It's going to be an indictment." Her pen paused midair. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm promising you." The tyrant in heels turned away first, pretending to study a hedge that didn't need trimming. "We'll see you at the compliance hearing tomorrow. Be prepared to show proof of residency." And just like that, she walked off, heels clicking across the pavement like a metronome of control. Inside, Sarah was sitting at the table, her cast resting on a pillow. "She's not stopping, is she?" "No," I said, lowering my voice. "But neither am I." I printed copies of the lapsed registration, time-stamped, notarized. Each line felt like a blade sharpened. I didn't plan on swinging first, but I'd make sure she never raised her hand again. That night, I noticed something strange. Every neighbor's porch light was on. Curtains shifted as I passed. People knew. They'd seen the footage. They just didn't want to be next. That's how Cynthia kept control, through fear of being fined, shamed, or singled out. Halfway down the street, Olivia Trent stepped out from her driveway. She was the HOA's secretary, quiet, usually invisible in Cynthia's shadow. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, glancing around before speaking again. "You should know. The board's insurance expired too." I stopped cold. "What?" She nodded. "No coverage, no liability shield." She didn't tell anyone. She said renewals were delayed, but Olivia hesitated, lowering her gaze. "Please don't tell her I said anything. She'd ruin me." I studied her, the tension in her shoulders, the fear in her voice. The officer of rules didn't just enforce policies, she enforced silence. "You did the right thing," I said quietly. "Did I?" Olivia asked, voice breaking. She always finds a way to win. "Not this time." When I got back home, I couldn't sleep. The HOA office lights glowed across the cul-de-sac. Through the blinds, I saw her silhouette, still working, still building her defense, still convinced she'd stay untouchable. She didn't know the storm was already coming, because tomorrow wasn't going to be a compliance hearing. It was going to be the first day her own rules turned against her. The HOA hearing wasn't held in any courtroom. It was inside the community recreation hall, staged like a performance for power. Fluorescent lights hummed above us, and the long oak table at the front looked more like a judge's bench than a neighborhood meeting space. Cynthia Hale sat at the center, chin lifted, wearing the same crimson blazer she'd worn when she broke my wife's wrist. The board chair didn't look nervous. She looked entertained. To her left sat the secretary, Olivia Trent, the conflicted witness who couldn't meet my eyes. She was pale, her hands clasped too tight around a folder. Her body language told me everything: guilt, fear, and something else buried beneath it. A wish to finally do what was right. When my name was called, the enforcer in crimson leaned forward with that rehearsed authority only people intoxicated by control could master. "Mr. Reeves," she began, "the purpose of this session is to determine whether your household's behavior constitutes a pattern of non-compliance and hostility toward the community association." Hostility, that's what she called it. I stayed standing. "The only hostility came from you putting your hands on my wife." Cynthia didn't blink. "Allegedly." That single word hit like a slap. My jaw tightened. "We have the footage. Every doorbell camera on this street saw it. Unauthorized recordings, the clipboard queen countered smoothly, are inadmissible under HOA privacy policy. I stared at her, half expecting her to smirk. She didn't. She was too skilled for that. She hid her satisfaction behind professionalism. That's when Olivia shifted in her seat. I caught it, a quick glance toward me, then down at her notes again. Her pen trembled slightly. She wanted to speak, but fear kept her nailed to silence. Across the room, neighbors filled folding chairs, whispering under their breath. They wanted a show, not justice. Cynthia fed off their attention. "Let's proceed," the tyrant in heels said, tapping her gavel. Yes, she actually had one. "You were informed that decorative mats are prohibited under Section 8B due to potential tripping hazards and aesthetic conflicts with uniform property presentation." Sarah's sling was visible from the back row, her wrists still wrapped, her face pale. "You call that aesthetic?" she muttered. Cynthia ignored her completely. "This hearing will also address your repeated acts of verbal aggression and slander toward the board." "Point to one," I said. The officer of rules flipped through her papers like an actress reading a script. "Here, email correspondence dated March 14th. Quote, 'Your enforcement tactics are unlawful and will be challenged.'" She looked up with feigned shock. "A direct threat to our governance." "That's not a threat," I said. "That's a warning." Her lips twitched. "See? You're doing it again." Laughter rippled through the back of the room. Neighbors too afraid to stand against her, but bold enough to laugh when she did. Olivia dropped her pen. It clattered on the hardwood floor like a gunshot. Everyone's eyes flicked toward her. She bent down slowly, buying herself a few seconds. Maybe courage. When she straightened again, her voice trembled. "Madam Chair," she began, "with respect, the HOA's insurance policy hasn't been renewed. We shouldn't even be holding this hearing." The room froze. Cynthia turned toward her with a look that could shatter glass. "Ms. Trent," she said evenly, "this is not your place. But enough." The board chair's voice cut through the air like a blade. Olivia sank back, cheeks burning. That was my opening. "She's right," I said. "This HOA has no legal standing. You're operating without corporate renewal, without insurance, without lawful jurisdiction. Every fine you've issued since 2017 is void." For a moment, one heartbeat, the enforcer in crimson lost her composure. She blinked once, slowly. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stepped forward. "I do, and you know I do." Her knuckles whitened around her pen. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that breaks steel. Then she smiled again, sharp and poisonous. "Meeting adjourned. This discussion is over." But she was wrong. It wasn't over. It was just recorded, in front of witnesses, on HOA cameras, and in every neighbor's mind. When I turned to leave, Olivia mouthed two words: "Call me." And in that moment, I knew. The officer of rules had finally cracked a seam. By the next morning, Cynthia Hale had already gone on the offensive. Flyers appeared taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. "Beware of false legal claims. HOA integrity under attack." Beneath the headline, she'd added a paragraph filled with subtle venom. It accused certain residents of misrepresenting facts and attempting to destabilize community order. She never named me, but everyone knew. The board chair understood optics. She ruled not just through bylaws, but through shame. That flyer was her weapon, and the whole street was her stage. When I stepped outside to tear one down, Mrs. Danvers, our elderly neighbor, stopped watering her roses. "You're going to make it worse, Jack," she whispered. "She's telling people you're dangerous." "Dangerous?" I asked. She nodded nervously. "She said you're using your government connections to harass her." The enforcer in crimson knew exactly how to twist the truth, turn her violence into self-defense and my justice into intimidation. That's how tyrants survive. They lie louder than anyone else dares to speak. I went back inside and found Sarah sitting by the window, scrolling through her phone. "She's winning the narrative," she said, showing me the neighborhood group chat. Cynthia's post sat at the top, polished, manipulative, full of legal jargon meant to make her sound like a victim of corruption. "She knows what she's doing," I murmured, "but we can't just sit here." "No," I said, "we won't." That evening I called Olivia. She answered on the second ring, whispering like someone hiding in a church. "She knows I spoke up," she said immediately. She called me this morning, said if I keep interfering, I'll be removed from the board and blacklisted from future HOAs. Did she put that in writing? I asked. She never does. The clipboard queen was careful, a master at making threats invisible. Nothing written, nothing recorded, just pressure behind closed doors. Then we'll make her say it out loud, I told her. A pause. How? By letting her believe she's already won. The next day I showed up at the HOA office, a converted garage lined with binders, certificates, and a wall-sized map of Crestwood Meadows. Cynthia was there, standing by the printer, lipstick the same shade as warning lights. She looked up, smiling thinly. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "here to apologize." For what? For defaming this association and wasting everyone's time. Her calm was surgical, the tone of a predator that thinks it already has its prey cornered. I sat down, deliberately setting my phone face down on the table, recording audio the entire time. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I just want peace." The tyrant in heels leaned back. "Then you should have thought about that before attacking my board." "I didn't attack anyone. I exposed a legal lapse." She waved her hand. "Technicality, we'll have that resolved soon. I'm drafting a backdated renewal." And there it was. The slip. A backdated renewal was fraud. I kept my face neutral, pretending to misunderstand. "Backdated?" She blinked. "Administrative correction," she corrected smoothly. "You wouldn't understand." "I might surprise you," I said quietly. When I left, I had everything I needed. A recorded admission that she intended to falsify filings. But I didn't rush to act. Timing mattered. The officer of rules believed she'd neutralized the threat. Let her think it. That night, I emailed Olivia the clip. She didn't reply, but I saw the read notification. A minute later, my phone buzzed. One message: tomorrow, 5 p.m., Community Hall. Be ready. I knew what that meant. The board was meeting again, off the record. Cynthia would try to silence the dissent before it spread. But this time, she wasn't the only one with evidence. When the clock hit midnight, I stood by the window, watching her lights across the street. The enforcer in crimson was still awake, pacing her office like a queen guarding her crumbling kingdom. She had no idea that the walls around her were already starting to crack, and this time, they'd collapse in public. The following evening, the air in the community hall was thick enough to taste. You could feel it, the tension, the quiet dread of neighbors pretending this was just another HOA meeting. But this wasn't about landscaping or mailboxes anymore. This was about power, about Cynthia Hale and how far she'd go to keep it. She stood at the head of the table, posture perfect, crimson jacket glowing under the fluorescent light like a battle flag. The board chair didn't even glance at me when I walked in. She didn't have to. Every move she made said the same thing. I'm still in control. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice sugar-coated and venom-laced, "you're welcome to attend as an observer only. This is a closed session regarding internal governance." "Internal governance?" I echoed, sitting down anyway. "You mean damage control." The enforcer in crimson ignored me, flipping through her papers. "For the record, there have been attempts to undermine the board's authority through malicious rumor and unauthorized disclosure of confidential materials." She looked directly at Olivia when she said it. The poor woman flinched. Her hands were folded tight in her lap, knuckles white. I watched the exchange silently, every detail burning into memory. The clipboard queen thrived on fear. Her version of order depended on it. That's why she was unraveling now, because someone had finally stopped being afraid. She continued, "We've been advised to consider disciplinary measures against any board member found complicit in information leaks." Olivia swallowed hard. "Madam Chair, Cynthia cut her off like a whip. "You'll speak when recognized." The arrogance was so thick it was almost theatrical. I leaned forward slightly, catching Olivia's gaze. "She can speak," I said. "She has something worth hearing." Cynthia turned her full attention to me now. "You are not recognized, Mr. Reeves. This is my meeting." "Not according to the state," I said quietly. A murmur went through the room. The tyrant in heels didn't like that. Her nostrils flared ever so slightly. "Excuse me?" I pulled out a printed document, the public record of Crestwood Meadows HOA's lapsed incorporation. You're not legally registered, which means this, I gestured to the table, isn't a lawful board. It's just neighbors pretending to be one. Her eyes flashed. That's misinformation. Prove it, I said. The officer of rules didn't have a comeback ready, and that was her tell. For a second, the silence broke her spell. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that true?" Cynthia forced a smile. "Don't be swayed by theatrics. He's manipulating public filings for his own agenda." That's when Olivia finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "It's true. I checked with the state housing registrar this morning. We're not listed." The room fell into stunned quiet. Cynthia's head turned slowly toward her, like a predator deciding whether to pounce. "You what?" "I verified it," Olivia said again, this time louder. "We've been unregistered for 6 years. Every fine, every citation, it's void." The board chair slammed her pen down. "You've overstepped your position, Ms. Trent." "No," Olivia said, rising from her seat. "You have." That one line shifted, the balance of power in the room. It wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than any shout. You could feel the audience start to see Cynthia differently, not as a protector of order, but as a woman exposed. I took the chance to stand too. "The thing about power, Cynthia," I said, "is that it doesn't disappear overnight. It collapses, one truth at a time." Her voice broke its calm veneer. "You think you can threaten me because of your position?" "I don't need to threaten you," I said. "You did this to yourself." She pointed toward the door. "Leave this building before I call security." I smiled faintly. "You mean the same contractors who aren't legally employed under a non-existent charter? Go ahead." The enforcer in crimson said nothing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind her composure. It wasn't about me. It was about the realization that her walls were finally cracking. When I left the hall, Olivia followed me outside, breathing hard. "She's not done," she whispered. "She'll retaliate." "I know," I said. "But next time, she won't be facing a prosecutor. She'll be facing the law itself." Behind us, the light from the meeting hall flickered, a dying heartbeat of authority. The clipboard queen might still be standing, but her kingdom was starting to burn. By sunrise, Cynthia Hale had shifted from damage control to retaliation. The HOA website, which she managed personally, was updated overnight with a new banner, "Unauthorized legal action by resident under investigation." Below it, my name was printed in bold, no proof, no explanation, just slander masquerading as policy. The board chair didn't just break rules, she rewrote them when they stopped serving her. Sarah found it before I did. Her phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, half curious, half afraid. "She's painting you like a criminal," she said, her voice shaking. "They think you're suing the entire community." "That's the point," I muttered. "She's isolating us." The enforcer in crimson thrived on control through perception. She couldn't fight me in court yet, so she fought me in the court of public opinion. I'd seen it 100 times in my line of work. Smear campaigns, character assassinations, psychological warfare dressed up as civility. But what she didn't understand was that federal prosecutors don't just handle criminals. We study them. I called Olivia that morning. She answered immediately. Her tone was tight, panicked. "She's furious. She called an emergency board session without quorum. She's rewriting the bylaws, removing voting rights from any resident involved in pending litigation." "Including me," I said. "Including everyone," she whispered. "If she gets away with this, she'll turn the whole neighborhood into her private fiefdom." That was the moment I decided to stop playing defense. By noon, I'd filed a preliminary injunction request with the county civil court. Nothing public yet, just a procedural placeholder. But once filed, it created a timestamp, a legal footprint. The next step would be evidence, clean, irrefutable, and undeniable. I knew exactly where to find it. The HOA's financials were stored in a public access folder, a leftover from their original registration days. The system hadn't been properly updated since their lapse in renewal. As I logged in, I found hundreds of PDFs, scanned checks, invoices, payment authorizations, all bearing Cynthia's signature. The clipboard queen had paid herself. Not salaries, but consulting fees. Thousands of dollars in unaccounted transfers marked as administrative services. She'd been siphoning dues straight into her personal account for years. Every prosecutor has that moment, the still, quiet instant when suspicion hardens into proof. This was mine, but I couldn't move too soon, not yet. Timing was everything. That evening I watched from my office window as the tyrant in heels made her rounds. Clipboard tucked under one arm, phone pressed to her ear. She walked house to house, smiling, shaking hands, whispering poison. She was securing her narrative, gathering allies. Except one thing was different tonight. People weren't smiling back. She stopped at the Petersons' house. They didn't open the door. At the next, Mrs. Danvers refused to sign whatever documents Cynthia held out. By the fourth rejection, the officer of rules looked visibly rattled. Control was slipping. At 8 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Olivia stood there, trembling, clutching an envelope. "She's planning something," she said breathlessly. "Tomorrow. She's calling a full community vote to expel you from the neighborhood." "Expel me?" I asked, almost laughing. "She's already printed the ballots," Olivia said. "But there's more. She's using the HOA funds to pay for the legal firm handling it, the same firm that represents her husband's company. Conflict of interest, embezzlement, fraud. The case was writing itself. I took the envelope. Inside were internal emails she'd managed to forward before Cynthia revoked her access. Messages proving she'd authorized those payments. "You realize what this means?" I asked. Olivia nodded. "If you go public, I'll testify." I studied her, this woman who'd spent years under Cynthia's shadow, now standing here shaking but resolute. "You don't know what she'll do when she finds out." "I do," she whispered, "and I'm done being afraid." Through the blinds, I saw Cynthia's SUV glide by slowly, headlights off, stopping in front of my driveway. She didn't get out, just sat there, engine idling, silhouette unmoving, watching. The enforcer in crimson was signaling something. This wasn't intimidation anymore, this was war. And I was about to make the first legal strike. I met Olivia at her kitchen table, because she said she couldn't talk anywhere else. The house smelled of coffee and damp laundry. Her hands fidgeted with a pen. She'd been the HOA secretary long enough to know where the bodies were buried, and tonight she looked like someone who dug one up and couldn't sleep. "You sure about this?" I asked, keeping my voice low. The blinds kept the streetlights from crawling in, and her face was a map of fear and resolve. She nodded once. "I recorded her. Not just words, conversations, Mr. Reeves. She told me she'd backdate filings. She ordered contractors to remove the park camera the week after the incident." The confession landed heavy and precise. The board chair's contempt had finally become audible. "You recorded Cynthia?" I sat forward. "How?" Olivia twisted the pen and pulled a small thumb drive from her cardigan. "I started carrying this after the night she threatened me. She thought I'd stay quiet like the others. I didn't want to be part of it anymore." Her eyes shone. "I recorded one meeting, then another, and when she said she'd falsify the renewal, I hit save. The enforcer in crimson had always been careful, too clever by half. But hubris makes people sloppy. She'd assumed no one would keep a copy. She pushed a manila envelope toward me. Inside were printouts, email chains, transcriptions, a photo of a contractor's hand on a camera housing. The sight of Cynthia's handwriting on a falsified form was like a key turning in a lock. "She called it an administrative correction," Olivia said. "She laughed when she told me, said it was how you protect the neighborhood." I felt sick. I examined the files quickly but deliberately. The metadata on the photos matched Olivia's dates. The emails bore routing the clipboard queen couldn't plausibly explain. Someone had been sloppy when they believed they were untouchable. "What about the insurance?" I asked. The officer of rules had depended on that shield. Without it, her empire was paper thin. Olivia's voice dropped. "Expired 2 years ago. She paid small amounts out of petty cash, but nothing formal. She told me not to worry, she'd handle it. She didn't. She wanted control." Her admission felt like an invitation. For weeks I'd been assembling a case, checking filings, mirroring financial directories, lining up witnesses. Olivia's confession gave me what I needed, an insider's affirmation that Cynthia intended to falsify corporate filings and had obstructed evidence. I asked if she'd testify. Her throat worked. "I will," she said quietly, then louder. "I will. I can't keep living like I helped her." The courage in that changed the room. It was small, human, and absolute. We recorded a sworn statement at her kitchen table. Olivia spoke into my phone, words trembling but clear, recounting dates, calls, the exact phrasing Cynthia used when she laughed about fixing the paperwork. Each line she spoke was a brick for a filing with the county and eventually a courtroom. Before I left, Olivia handed me a small notebook. "She keeps notes here," she whispered. "Private reminders, meetings, amounts." I slid it into my jacket like contraband. The tyrant in heels had kept her ledger close, and now it was out of her hands. Outside, I paused under the street lamp and looked back. Her windows glowed, and for once the glow wasn't a warning. It felt like a window to truth. The next step was procedural. Affidavits, chain of custody, filings that would force the county to act. But this night, Olivia's confession had done something else. It peeled away the last layer of invincibility Cynthia wore. I drove home, knowing the legal engines were ready to turn. It wasn't vengeance, it was a meticulous, lawful undoing. Olivia Trent had just become the hinge on which the whole case would swing. Justice would follow, measured, deliberate, and inevitable. The next 48 hours felt like walking through glass, silent, sharp, and dangerous. I spent most of it inside my home office, piecing together the chain of evidence Olivia had given me. Every file, every timestamp, every backdated form Cynthia Hale had forged was lined up like dominoes, each one leading to her collapse. The board chair didn't know it yet, but her downfall was already in motion. I'd prepared the affidavit for state review, complete with Olivia's recorded confession, metadata verification, and financial irregularities. It wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was fraud, obstruction, and abuse of office. Exactly the kind of thing I prosecuted for a living. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling she'd sensed something. She always did. At noon, a black SUV slowed in front of my driveway. The window rolled down just enough to see her face. The enforcer in crimson, lips painted with the same red as her blazer, eyes unreadable. She didn't step out or speak. She just smiled, lifted her phone, and took a picture of my house. Then she drove off. The message was clear. "I'm watching you too." Sarah saw it from the living room window. "She's not afraid of you," she said softly. "She should be," I replied. But I wasn't interested in fear. I wanted exposure. The clipboard queen operated in the shadows of authority, manipulating optics and procedure. To beat her, I had to drag her into daylight. That night, I called a friend from the local news network, someone I'd worked with years ago during a consumer protection case. I didn't give names yet, only hinted at the story. An HOA president accused of falsifying records, misusing resident funds, and committing battery during enforcement. The interest was immediate. "Send me what you can," he said, quietly. By morning, I had a burner folder ready. Redacted documents, email scans, the voice recording, where the tyrant in heels laughed about correcting the dates. I uploaded them under a BZZ pseudonym to a private link, giving the reporter controlled access. If Cynthia tried to bury this through intimidation or influence, the story would already exist outside her reach. At the same time, I needed the county clerk's office to move faster. I scheduled a meeting with the compliance division under the pretext of reviewing community association filings. When I arrived, the clerk flipped through the records and frowned. "You're right," she said. "No renewal since 2017. The entity's administratively dissolved. Legally, they have no board authority." That was it, the nail in her coffin. Still, I couldn't celebrate. People like Cynthia didn't crumble quietly. They fought to the last inch of illusion. When I came home, a letter was waiting on my porch in an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed text, "Cease and desist harassment of HOA officials or face immediate civil action." It was unsigned but written in her cadence. The officer of rules had made her next move, trying to intimidate me through a fake legal warning, a hollow threat, but it showed she was panicking. Later that evening, Olivia called again. Her voice shook. "She knows I helped you," she said. "She came to my office and asked for my laptop. I told her it was at home. She didn't believe me." "Are you safe?" I asked. "I think so," but she said, "You don't betray the hand that signs your paycheck." I exhaled slowly. She just admitted retaliation. "I need you to document everything, time, date, wording. That statement alone could cost her everything." Olivia hesitated. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we prepare the strike." Across the street, Cynthia's blinds were open. She was pacing her office, phone glued to her ear, still orchestrating her illusion of control. She didn't realize that every conversation she had, every lie she repeated, was tightening the noose she'd woven herself. Tomorrow, I'd file the official complaint with the county prosecutor's office. The enforcer in crimson wanted a war of procedure. She was about to get one written in ink and sealed by law. I drove into the city before dawn and felt like time was narrowing to a point. Marcus Dean's office smelled of coffee and old case files. The fluorescent lights humdimmed over a wall of framed prosecutions that looked every bit like a promise. He'd cleared his morning for me, my colleague, my sounding board, and the one who knew how to move a legal engine when it needed oiling. We spread everything on his conference table: Olivia's thumb drives, the downloaded bank ledgers, the county clerk printouts, the recorded admission where Cynthia Hale laughed about fixing the dates. The board chair's handwriting stared back at us from invoices and check stubs, each one a small, undeniable crime. Marcus tapped the ledger with a pen. "Embezzlement looks clean here," he said. "She disguised transfers as vendor payments. We can follow the money." The enforcer in crimson had relied on plausible deniability. She'd never expected someone to connect the dots. We started calling them dots, and they began to form lines. Bank accounts, shell entities, contractors that existed only on paper. The more we traced, the more the clipboard queen's empire looked like a paper throne with rotten legs. Marcus set priorities. First, we'd secure a provisional injunction to freeze the HOA accounts and prevent Cynthia from moving the funds. Second, we'd file a motion with the county to compel production of original corporate filings and bank statements. Third, we'd prepare depositions. Olivia, Marcia, the contractors, even the HOA treasurer, who always looked nervous at board meetings. Each step required precise timing. Every subpoena had to be airtight. By late morning, we were in motion. Marcus called the court clerk and got a tentative calendar. I drafted affidavits while he arranged for process servers. The tyrant in heels might have expected obsequious neighbors and whispered compliance, but she hadn't expected paperwork to attack her like a trained dog. She'd built habit into habit, and habit can be dismantled with a paper trail. At noon, I met Eleanor Price at her kitchen table. The elderly woman's hands were steady, even if her voice shook when she spoke about fines that had nearly taken her house. "She told me it was for curb appeal," Eleanor said, "but I know what it was for. It was for her spa bills." The officer of rules had fined the vulnerable into silence, and Eleanor's trembling affidavit would be another quiet weight on Cynthia's ledger. We tracked one contractor to a P.O. box and a disposable phone number. The address led to a storage facility. The storage held nothing but packing peanuts in a unit with paperwork that matched Cynthia's signatures. We photographed, notarized, and logged everything into a secure evidence folder. Chain of custody mattered more than vengeance. Evidence without chain was rhetoric. Evidence with chain was law. That evening, Marcus and I met with the county prosecutor in a cramped office that smelled like toner and resolve. He flipped through the packet and didn't look up when he said, "This is solid. If you want the injunction, we'll need to show immediate risk of dissipation." I handed him the wire transfers and the backdated draft Cynthia had mentioned on tape. He tapped his pen, thinking about bailment and fiduciary duty. "We can move fast," he said, "but we'll need sworn statements and clear custody." Outside, the sunlight slanted low against the courthouse steps. I let it hit my face and felt the schematic of the next day's form. Motions, subpoenas, depositions, a temporary receiver for the HOA accounts, and a public record that would strip the board chair of the illusion she'd sold for years. When I called Olivia that night, she answered on the third ring. Her voice was steadier than it had been in months. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Not sure," I said honestly, "but ready." "Then I'll sign," she said. "I'll say everything." Her agreement clicked into place like a locked file. It wasn't dramatic. There were no gavel strikes or banners. It was quiet, procedural, and inevitable, the way a real legal siege unfolds. The clipboard queen might still posture at meetings, and the tyrant in heels might still smile into camera lenses. But the work we'd done today put levers under her throne. I left the city with a list of tasks and a court date scribbled on the back of an envelope. The next morning, process servers would start knocking. The legal machinery rarely looked cinematic up close. Lots of stamps, trips to the clerk, sworn affidavits, but it was lethal in its persistence. As I drove back through Crestwood Meadows, the streetlights blinked on and off, one by one, like a neighborhood holding its breath. The enforcer in crimson paced her office that night. I knew it, but for the first time since Sarah fell on our porch, I slept with the knowledge that something heavier than anger was moving on our side, the law itself. By dawn, the papers were served. The process server, a retired deputy I trusted, left each envelope like a loaded truth on the doorsteps of every board member. But the one addressed to Cynthia Hale was different. It was thicker, heavier, stamped with the seal of the county prosecutor's office. I imagined her face when she opened it, when she read the injunction freezing the HOA's accounts and the notice of investigation bearing her name. The board chair had spent years believing she was untouchable. Now the system she manipulated was finally turning on her. At 9 a.m., she appeared outside my home, the enforcer in crimson, sunglasses on, phone pressed to her ear, voice cutting through the quiet. "You think you can humiliate me?" she shouted across the lawn. "You'll regret this, Jack." I didn't answer. I was done with her theatrics. Let the law answer instead. Minutes later, a black sedan rolled up. 2 investigators from the county's Financial Crimes Division stepped out, badges glinting. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. They were here for her. "Ms. Hale," one of them said, "we're here to collect association records. You've been named in an active inquiry." Her mask slipped. For a moment, the clipboard queen looked human, stunned, pale, uncertain. But arrogance was her armor, and she reached for it fast. "You can't just barge into private property." The lead investigator lifted a folder. "We have a warrant, signed this morning." I watched from my porch as the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The officer gestured toward her house. She turned slowly and walked inside, heels clicking against the concrete. The tyrant in heels was finally walking into her own reckoning. By noon, word had spread through Crestwood Meadows like wildfire. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes, phones buzzed non-stop. Some were shocked, others relieved. Power built on fear always collapses fastest when the fear disappears. Olivia called around 1. Her voice was trembling, but this time it wasn't fear, it was disbelief. "They searched her office," she said. "They took boxes, files, check ledgers, even her laptop. It's really happening." "It is," I said. "She was screaming when they left," Olivia whispered. "Said you planted evidence, said she'd make sure you lost your job." I sighed. That's her last trick, projection. When people like her start losing power, they accuse everyone else of corruption. The officer of rules didn't show up to the emergency town hall she'd called for that evening. Instead, her vice chair, Harold Benton, stood trembling at the podium, trying to keep order among 50 restless residents. "We're temporarily suspending operations," he stammered, "until the investigation concludes." The crowd erupted. Voices clashed, anger, confusion, relief. Sarah sat beside me, her wrists still wrapped but her eyes fierce. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did." The enforcer in crimson had underestimated everything, our patience, our resilience, our refusal to yield. She thought control was permanent, but authority borrowed from fear has an expiration date. Later that night, a motion alert from my door camera buzzed my phone. The footage showed Cynthia standing at the edge of my driveway, hair disheveled, eyes wild. No clipboard, no blazer, just fury. She pointed at the house, muttering words the mic couldn't catch, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. The board chair had finally lost her composure. By morning, I received confirmation from the prosecutor's office. The injunction was upheld. The HOA's financial accounts were frozen pending audit, and a forensic accountant had already confirmed potential misuse of member funds. Cynthia's name was listed in bold under primary signatory. Justice was slow, deliberate, procedural, but it was real. Olivia came over later that day, tears streaking her cheeks. "I thought she'd destroy me," she said. "She tried," I replied. "But you can't destroy someone who finally tells the truth." Outside, neighbors gathered in small clusters, talking in low voices. The community that once bowed to her now looked up, at each other, at the freedom they hadn't realized they had lost. The illusion had broken. The clipboard queen had ruled by fear, but fear had found a stronger ally: the truth. The public hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening at the county courthouse. By then, Cynthia Hale's empire was already crumbling, but no one expected her to show up. And yet, as the clock struck 6, she did. The board chair walked in flanked by her lawyer, her crimson jacket, immaculate, chin high, every inch the queen she believed herself to be. The room was packed. Neighbors, reporters, HOA members from surrounding communities, even county officials curious about the downfall of Crestwood Meadows. Cameras clicked like distant gunfire. This was no longer a local dispute. This was spectacle. When she saw me seated near the front, her expression faltered for just a heartbeat. The enforcer in crimson wasn't used to losing her audience. But tonight, the crowd wasn't here to listen to her. They were here to watch justice draw breath. The prosecutor's aide called the session to order, reading the list of charges under review: corporate misconduct, fraudulent financial reporting, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction of inquiry. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Each one sent ripples across the crowd. Cynthia's attorney rose first, delivering a rehearsed defense about administrative misunderstandings and malicious targeting by a disgruntled resident. He used my name like it was a stain. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "has personal motives in this matter. He's exploited his professional position to intimidate private citizens." I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. The evidence was lined up on the projection screen behind him: emails, timestamps, transaction logs. Every word he said disintegrated under the weight of fact. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room lock onto me. "This isn't about personality," I began. "It's about power. For 6 years, this community's been governed by deception. The woman sitting across from me, Cynthia Hale, your so-called protector, turned HOA law into her personal weapon. She fined, threatened, and even assaulted residents while hiding behind expired authority." The room was silent except for the click of a camera shutter. I pointed toward the evidence screen. "You'll see wire transfers labeled as community maintenance fees. Every one of those payments went straight to her consulting firm, an entity that doesn't exist on state record." You'll hear her voice admitting to falsifying corporate renewals. "And you'll see the letter she sent, attempting to intimidate a witness." Cynthia's hand twitched. The clipboard queen whispered something to her lawyer, but his expression said it all. He knew this wasn't salvageable. The prosecutor asked for the witness statement next. Olivia stepped forward, visibly trembling, yet resolute. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. "I worked under Cynthia for 4 years, she said. "I saw what she did. The fines, the false filings, the threats. I helped her at first because I was afraid to lose my job. But I can't stay silent anymore." Her words broke something open in the room. Murmurs spread. A woman in the back whispered, "That happened to me, too." Another nodded. The tyrant in heels watched her influence dissolve one confession at a time. Cynthia stood abruptly. "You're all ungrateful," she shouted. The room jolted at her voice. "I built this neighborhood. I kept you safe." The prosecutor raised a hand. "Ms. Hale, please sit down." But she didn't. The officer of rules turned toward the audience, eyes blazing. "You think he's your savior?" she spat, pointing at me. "He's just another man who wants control." I met her glare evenly. "Control?" I said softly. "No, accountability." The echo of that word hung in the air longer than any argument. After the hearing adjourned, the prosecutor announced the county's intent to pursue full civil charges and refer the case for criminal review. The room erupted, some clapping, others stunned silent. Cynthia was escorted out by deputies while reporters followed like vultures circling a collapsing monument. Sarah squeezed my hand. Her cast was off now, her wrist still stiff but healing. "It's over," she whispered. "Almost," I said. "Now the system finishes what we started." Outside, the night air was electric. Cameras flashed as the board chair was guided down the courthouse steps, her red jacket vivid under the floodlights. For years, she'd made residents lower their eyes in her presence. Tonight, every eye followed her, but not with fear, with justice. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood looked different. The banners were gone, the fear was gone, and the air finally felt like it belonged to the people who lived there. But one thing remained: the memory of Cynthia Hale. Even without her red blazer glinting at dawn meetings, her shadow still lingered. a warning burned into the pavement of Crestwood Meadows. The board chair had been stripped of her title, charged formally with fraud and assault, her assets frozen pending trial. She'd traded her clipboard for court summons, her power for paperwork. Yet, as satisfying as that was, I couldn't shake the unease that came after victory, the kind that makes you wonder how long the peace will last. That morning, I walked past the same spot on the porch where Sarah's wrist had shattered. The mat was back, the same one that had started it all. "Welcome home," it read in soft blue script. I hadn't placed it there. One of the neighbors must have done it. A quiet act of rebellion against everything the enforcer in crimson had tried to erase. Sarah stepped outside beside me, sunlight catching the faint scar on her wrist. "You think it's really over?" she asked. I looked down the street where the clipboard queen used to patrol like a monarch guarding invisible borders. Now, her house sat empty, shutters drawn, mailbox stuffed, a foreclosure notice pinned to the door. "Over?" I said quietly. "Not exactly, but it's balanced." When the media coverage hit, the story spread farther than any of us expected. Federal Prosecutor exposes HOA corruption in local suburb. The headline turned Crestwood Meadows into a case. Study in accountability. Emails poured in. Homeowners from across the country sharing stories of their own tyrants and heels, their own neighborhood nightmares. I realized then this wasn't just about one HOA. It was about every community where power hid behind bylaws. Olivia called that afternoon. Her voice was lighter than I'd ever heard it. "They offered me a position on the temporary oversight committee," she said. "State appointed, transparent elections, financial audits, everything public record." "You deserve that," I said. "So do you." "I'll stick to my day job," I replied, smiling. "But I'll be watching." As I hung up, I looked back toward Cynthia's house one last time. The curtains moved slightly. A maintenance worker, maybe, or just the wind. But for a split second, I thought I saw her reflection again. The ghost of the tyrant in heels, still glaring, still unwilling to let go. That image burned and faded just as fast. Power doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers in memory, as a lesson. That evening, the HOA held its first open community meeting under new leadership. No intimidation, no closed-door whispers, just residents, folding chairs, and shared relief. I stood at the back, unnoticed, listening. People spoke without fear. They questioned policies. They laughed. Someone even joked about planting rose bushes again. For the first time, Crestwood Meadows sounded alive. When Olivia addressed the room, she said something that stayed with me. "Order without empathy isn't order at all," she said. "It's control dressed in civility, and control like that breaks everything. Wrists, spirits, communities." Applause filled the hall, honest and unprompted. I felt Sarah's hand slip into mine. "You did that," she whispered. "No," I said. "We did." Outside, dusk rolled across the cul-de-sac. The air smelled of rain and renewal. The mat beneath our feet soaked up both like it was cleansing something far older than mud. In the distance, a tow truck idled outside Cynthia's old house. They were taking away her SUV, the same black one she used to park at every confrontation. It was poetic in a quiet way. The officer of rules had once written that every community needs structure to survive. Maybe she was right, but structure without compassion only builds cages. And we'd finally broken ours. As we stood there, neighbors waving from their porches, lights glowing warm through windows, I realized what real order looked like. Not control, not compliance, but coexistence. And if there's one thing this story taught me, it's this. Justice doesn't always come in sirens or headlines. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the simple peace of a home reclaimed. If you've ever stood up to power and felt that tremor of fear turn into resolve, then you already know this feeling. And if you want more stories of people taking back what's theirs, one rule, one street, that's one home at a time, hit subscribe, share your story, and let me know where you're watching from. Because somewhere, another enforcer in crimson is still writing her next violation notice. And someone like you is about to stand up and tear it down.